Hi, Sat. How are you?
Hello, Gary. Thanks for having me here. Trying to survive the cold weather here in Napoli.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
it's
Yeah.
an honor for me as well. Thanks for having me here and providing this platform.
y-
Hopefully, yeah, we'll have something beneficial out of the discussion later on.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sat. So first question is perhaps I would like to invite you to introduce yourself, perhaps for, a lot of architecture students, they wanted to know more about yourself. Could you please briefly tell us about, your journey, what have you studied, and what made you so far until now you are here in Napoli?
Right. Okay. I would say I'm a proud Planejaya KJ/PJ kid from Selangor and an aspiring astrobiologist. So at the moment, I'm pursuing my master's or laurea magistrale in biology of extreme environments at the University of Naples Federico II in Italy, and I'm on the astrobiology curriculum or track. So just for those who are not familiar with astrobiology, very quickly, if I could, it's a broad field of interdisciplinary sciences from biology, physics, chemistry, geology to oceanography and many other science disciplines. So essentially looking into or studying about life in the universe. And this would first and foremost, of course, require an understanding of life as we know it on planet Earth and the nature of the environments that support it, like how do organisms thrive at extreme cold or hot conditions, or at extremely high pressure, like at the bottom of the ocean, and also on polluted, toxic, or radioactive contaminated sites like in Chernobyl. So that's pretty much about me at this stage of my life, a first year master's student exploring the world of extreme environments and astrobiology, looking into research questions on how life as we know it has come into existence, its origins and evolution, what different types of environments are necessary for life or can sustain life, and also what might life look like on another planet or planetary bodies.
When we come to the definition of resilience, I quite like the word called evolution and also survivability when he mentioned in his book. So I perhaps this is a good time to ask like what's your opinion or what's your definition of resilience in general?
Right. So when it comes to defining or understanding the concept of resiliency or resilience, you can of course look at it through a couple of ways. And like in terms of psychology, it's about mental or emotional ability to successfully adapt to difficult or trying times and overcoming like challenging circumstances. And if you were to look at it through material physics, then it's about the capacity or ability of a material, like rubber, for instance, to undergo stretching as much as possible to a point before it completely snaps or become what's called plastically deformed. And bring my understanding to this concept of resiliency largely through studies on like extreme ecology, microbial life at extremes, and to a certain extent on the resilience of life to astrophysical events, we can discuss resiliency or resilience coupled with or in comparison with resistance or toughness, perhaps, if you were to also look at it through the material physics lenses. So when we talk about resilience in terms of biology or ecology, to be more precise, we say resilience in an ecosystem is the ability of a disturbed ecosystem to return to its original pre-disturbed state, whereas resistance is the property of an ecosystem to resist changes, to kind of like remain unchanged when subjected to disturbances or different stresses. So in both cases, the disturbance can be either man-made in the form of toxic waste into rivers or oceans, or natural. You can think of volcanic eruption or meteoritic impact. So in fact, most ecosystems, they are known to be a metastable state and apparent state of equilibrium and can be pushed to a couple of different stable or metastable states based on how an ecosystem is made up of. And to simply put, resilience is largely concerned with self-repairing, like how a forest regenerates to its initial state upon being engulfed by wildfires. Meanwhile, resistance is about the level of endurance to withstand changes or disturbances. And you can look at or apply this concept of resilience and resistance from an ecosystem level to communities, populations, and even to a species level. It's also possible to look at it from a planetary scale.
Interesting. I mean, I quite like the term when you mentioned about equilibrium and also this kind of balance. How do you see in biology side where how do you judge where if let's say a certain species or certain environment is not resilient enough or the occupants or the living form like us, like ourselves, is not resilient enough to face a certain reality. For example, climate change is one thing. So how do you see that in the scenario of climate change? Perhaps something can be related to your study in space biology or astronomical biology for human beings.
Of course, and specifically in terms of like climate change, I think if I were to look at plants, for example, it can be said like if the plant is able to withstand, extreme conditions, like it already have that sort of innate ability, or it can probably like switch on, known as like plastic phenotype or plasticity. Okay, I can't get the actual term right now, but it's something related to plastic phenotype, where it can, if it is subjected to like these extreme conditions, then it's probably, if it has within it, then the plant can cope with the extreme changes. So then it's able to continue photosynthesizing and like survive extreme, heat or temperature. But if it doesn't, then it's almost certain, if it's not able to adapt, it's almost certain that it's gonna die. And that's why we also see like a lot of animals being pushed to extinction, and a lot of species are not able to, survive because of this. I think because they're not resilient enough, or even if they're resistant towards it, uh, they are in the long run they just cannot mm, evolve as fast as how the changes are taking place. So like it also involves like the time scale, and most of the things that we are looking here on Earth when it comes to resiliency is like the environment is not having the, or at least for most of the, species which are at threat or under threat, they don't have, or they're not given the time to kind of like co-evolve. So when it comes to like evolution and like resilience, I think brain like is probably the most I mean like the human brain is probably like the most advanced, or like we are adapted in that sort of, in that sense. The ability to think and to kind of like utilize like all these resources that we have, and for our survival. So we might not, be able to have like that sort of physiological adaptation, like how, some tardigrades or like some extremophiles have, but we're able to think and kind of like, make use of the resources. And like we have mentioned, maybe find some sort of like equipment that enables us to, you know dive deep into the ocean to help us like breathe down there with oxygen tanks and whatnot. And also if it's too hot, you know turn on the air conditioner, like come up with a fan to kind of like solve that. So I think that's how we've probably evolved, like that's how we are also resilient as a human species. So I mean, looking at the resilience of life and the planet itself, maybe as a thought exercise or case study, would be something that I can go forward with at this point of time. So it's pretty certain now that the survival of species, would be pretty much hinged upon the particular species or ecosystem's capacity to evolve or adapt, if not, able to resist the changes happening in the surrounding. And it's also becoming very clear that the rapid amount or scale of anthropogenic disturbances, like the amount of mess that we are creating, are causing many other forms of life or environment, making it difficult to co-evolve. So eventually being pushed to extinction. So with extreme climate change events, it has also been forecasted, although with a fair amount of uncertainty, that between the years 2030 and 2039, we would be observing a large scale of changes in the global distribution of vegetation. So many of the plants would be concentrated largely at the northern hemisphere, closer to polar north, and most of the other continents will be pretty much subject to desertification. And when we look at tardigrades, other form of extremophiles and plant species which are able to survive despite these extreme changes, now it begs the question: can life continue to persist, or is life itself resistant? And like what I've mentioned also earlier, like and it's also common like for the saying or like this phrase that life always finds a way. But it would also very much depend on its resilience, and also given that the necessary conditions are there for life to emerge and flourish. So if you look on a planetary scale, Earth is pretty much reliant on sun for its heat and energy to sustain many of the life forms we know here. And the sun is the nearest star to us, and we know with many stars in the galaxy, it also has a lifespan. The sun would eventually run out of steam or gas and will slowly die off, becoming a red dwarf, obliterating, the inner planets Mercury and Uranus. And although Earth is said to probably survive this when the sun becomes a red dwarf, but the environment, or it would no longer be habitable at that point of time. So once the sun has exhausted all its fuel, it is said that it will contract into a cold corpse of a star known as the white dwarf. So when we look at life at that point of time, if that's how life comes to its harrowing death or end, and if you were to ask my astrophysics professor, he would probably suggest meeting our demise through spaghettification, when the sun turns into a black hole and pretty much suck all the nearby objects due to its strong gravitational pull, that nothing can escape out of it. But for those in the Milky Way galaxy, like us, the odds are pretty much high, for dying in such a way, being spaghettified, because 95% of all stars would just turn into white dwarfs. This is because only bigger and heavier stars could end up as black holes, and our sun pretty much would become a white dwarf too, being in this galaxy. So while it may not happen for another like plus minus or 5 or more billions of years, cosmic death is pretty much certain. And if humans as a species is resilient, I think the whole idea of interplanetary travel and the research into Earth-like or habitable exoplanets, they pretty much seem like an exciting or cool endeavor for humankind. Context of, humans as a resilient species. I think at this point we have entered this era of time, this anthropogenic timescale. So at this point of time, it's a lot to do with how humans are causing disturbances, how humans are polluting, how humans are disrupting the sort of stability. So and it again goes back to, I mean, the Earth, as long as the sun is there, would survive. But humans as a species, we might not, depending on how we adapt or evolve. So I think, like for me, I mean, eventually, again, like as long as the sun is there, and as long as the other conditions are there, life would eventually find a way. Complex life, I'm not sure. Maybe microbial life, like life would be there. Unless when we talk about conditions which might wipe off the extremophiles, if these conditions are too extreme, even for the extremophiles, then life would not exist. I mean, on planet Earth itself. But given like, because we know, I mean, that shows how like important the sun is, like from the planetary point of view. Um, but on Earth, I mean, we could be probably driving ourselves into extinction, like making conditions unfavorable or making it difficult just for us to live on planet Earth. And yeah, if that is the reality, then some would say, oh, then we'll just find another planet. But humans being humans, would they be able to also sustain their life? I'm not sure. Yeah. If I were to give a closer example, like in terms of resilience, right? Also in light of climate change, would probably be like in Indonesia. Like we know, like Jakarta is sinking, and like there's a plan, or I think there already works going on to move the capital Jakarta. I mean, the capital which is in Jakarta to like somewhere in East Kalimantan. So that's probably, I mean, you want to look at like human resilience. Maybe that's one way of like, okay, the place is sinking, well, thanks to climate change, and also thanks to humans. So what they're doing is probably like, okay, let's move to another place. But in terms of like healing, Jakarta also would need, some form of like work to kind of like patch up. It's not possible to probably bring all of the people there to this new capital, but how can they kind of like reconcile for those in Jakarta itself, how to like minimize, the whatever work that needs to be done, so that that place is also somewhat hospitable to those who are still living there. If it doesn't sink, at all. And also going back to like how, in terms of healing and stuff, it's a again matter of survival and how we look at it. And we I think with this whole debate or like issue about climate change and like global warming and stuff, it eventually goes back on a bigger scale. I think to us as I mean, like, it should be some sort of like reflection on us humans as a species, if we are able to survive here or not. Because like, although like in the case of Chernobyl, there were life forms there, but these are life forms which have adapted to the radioactive conditions, which are still not hospitable for most of us humans. So eventually plants or like other forms of organisms might find a way, to survive in these sort of conditions. But for us humans, we would still need to use some sort of like devices or like filters or whatever. I think mask oxygen kind of thing, to have like to extract oxygen, perhaps, you know. Um, but it's going to be harsh. Of course, it's not going to be easy if we were to come to that stage. But if life can find a way, I think humans also can find a way, and just sort of like heal the planet as